Hello, my name is Katie Vasquez. I am a dual language instructional facilitator working in the Department of Language and Culture in District 200. I wanted to share with you this presentation that was shared on September 15th with families who joined us live for a Google Meets. It's the same information that I'll be going over with you now. So we're going to be talking about constructing language in the District 200 dual language program with a focus on what it's like in kindergarten and first grade. You'll notice throughout the presentation that we have a theme of construction. Just an analogy to help us think of this active process of building our students' language. The topics we're going to be covering is how we acquire a new language, learning in a dual language class, and then we'll talk about some of the specifics of remote learning. First of all, we'll cover the language acquisition process. Many researchers and linguists like to refer to language acquisition as a process where students move through these different phases. However, they're not exactly linear phases. We don't go from one straight to another. Depending on our experiences and who we're with, we might be in kind of different phases at different times. Typically, though, we see students beginning in a silent period, and it might seem like students aren't acquiring language because we don't hear them producing language. However, in this silent period, students are absorbing lots of information. They're hearing the language, they're hearing the sounds that the letters make and how words are pronounced, and they're kind of taking it all in, soaking it up. And students begin to say some words. They're repeating the words that they hear. They might be prompted to practice some vocabulary words and repeat them. However, they're not quite comfortable yet producing their language on their own. Students do have up to 500 Spanish words in their receptive vocabulary, though. These words that they can understand and put together. And we see students being in this silent period anywhere from a couple of weeks up to 6 months, just kind of depending on the student's own personality and how comfortable they feel taking some risks and starting to say words. And the construction analogy, you see that it doesn't look like anything yet. We can't tell what's going to be built, but there's a lot of prep work going on for what is to come. In the early production phase of language acquisition, we see that students have built this foundation that the rest of their language is going to be built on. We're starting to see some of the progress and hear some of it in our students as they speak in 1 to 2 word responses. And this is the language that they are producing spontaneously. They don't have to be prompted, or they're not necessarily just repeating what they're hearing around them. They would be using things like patterned language, the kinds of language that they're hearing every day, like the teacher asks them, "Cómo estás?" and they're able to respond back to the teacher with how they're feeling that day. Students in this phase of language acquisition typically have about 1,000 words in their receptive vocabulary that they can understand and put together. And they spend about 6 months in this phase of language acquisition. Then we see students becoming even more comfortable in the language, and it's starting to catch on. In the construction analogy, this is a really exciting time because we see the frame going up and we can tell what is to come. We can tell that this is going to be a 2-story house and what kind of frame is being built. In language acquisition, we see students catching on, starting to speak spontaneously with short phrases. They're feeling more comfortable. They kind of know what's expected when they're hearing language. They know how to respond. They might even initiate some conversation on their own in Spanish. And they have about 3,000 words in their receptive vocabulary. And typically, students spend about a year in this phase of language acquisition. So, if we're thinking of our kindergartners and first graders, if they have moved quickly through those first two phases, we might see them hanging out in the speech emergence phase through first grade, second grade, where they are speaking in short phrases but not quite putting together their own sentences yet. Very typical in dual language. Moving into intermediate fluency, we're starting to get really excited because we can really see things coming together. Students are able to form sentences and engage in conversations. They might have some grammatical errors, which is to be expected. It's very typical for language learners to just kind of put themselves out there and speak, and they know that maybe I'm not conjugating that verb correctly, or some words might be out of order, but the listener really can understand what they're trying to say. The students in this phase have about 6,000 words in their vocabulary, and they can be in this phase of language acquisition for about 2 years. So we're starting to see students in this phase, the middle of elementary school, even into later elementary school, depending on how quickly they're moving through the other phases of language acquisition preceding these. And then what most linguists call the last phase of language acquisition is this advanced fluency, where in our construction analogy, the house is complete, it's ready to be lived in, everything is done. In our language acquisition phases, students feel really comfortable in their second language and they sound almost native-like, where if you hear a student speaking, you aren't quite sure if the language was their first language or their second, because they're just starting to sound really native-like. Students add a lot of words to their receptive and productive vocabularies during this time, and they spend many years in this phase of language acquisition. Anywhere from 5 to 8 years, they're in this phase. And this is one of the reasons why when we were creating our dual language program, we really pushed to be able to provide the program beyond fifth grade, beyond eighth grade even, and all the way through high school, because we know that to get students into this advanced fluency phase, we really have to be able to work with them for several years so that they can acquire Spanish. I mentioned that many linguists call this the ultimate phase of language acquisition. However, I like to think of one more phase, and just that once you're a language learner, you are a lifelong language learner. It's kind of like owning a house with those never-ending projects and things that need to be maintained, and just the upkeep of a house. Language learners are always learning new things and refining their language. All the different people that they meet, the different contexts that they're using language in, stretch language learners and have them using language in different ways. So this is a long journey that your students in kindergarten or first grade are embarking on, but it can be a very fruitful one. So in thinking of this language acquisition happening in the school setting, we like to think of teachers kind of like the general contractors who are overseeing construction on all the houses in a new subdivision. But all these houses are in different phases. Some houses are just having the foundation poured. Some houses are complete and livable. Some houses, the frame is just going up. And that's very similar to the students that teachers have in their classrooms. They're working with students who are fluent Spanish speakers. They're working with students who have had some Spanish exposure prior to school, and some who are just starting out. But the teachers have the plans in hand, and they are supporting each of these learners so that they are successful in school. Something that teachers have in mind as they're working with students is that emotions play a role in language acquisition. This was first talked about with a researcher named Stephen Krashen and his effective filter hypothesis. Um, he talked a lot about how language learning requires public practice. There's only so much language learning you can do on your own in the quiet of your home, just listening to stories read aloud or whatnot. Excuse me. Um, he also talked about how negative emotions can create almost a filter, a wall that goes up and blocks learning. In our construction analogy, it's like it's been raining for days or weeks on end, and the construction cannot advance. The work is at a standstill, and nothing can be done because it's just rained so much. However, if we are providing a very engaging, supporting, affirming, non threatening environment to students, it's like having a sunny forecast where the workers are going to be able to get a lot done. In the classroom, lots of language learning is happening. Students are acquiring language, and they're taking risks and they're feeling good about it. Now, everyone has a rainy day now and then where something is frustrating or just not going well. But knowing that in general, it's sunny, there's a supporting, affirming environment, really helps students kind of continue through that frustration, get over that hump of, oh my gosh, I don't know this, or I don't understand what the teacher is saying, and helps them keep going with their acquisition. So in school, teachers have this in mind. They're really working hard to create these kinds of environments. And now that's extending, hopefully, through the computer screen into your home or wherever your child is working on their dual language work. Teachers are providing lots of supports. I talked about them being the general contractor, where they're overseeing lots of construction projects at once. They're providing supports to students in many different ways. They're doing things like providing consistent immersion. Dual language is also referred to as dual immersion, in that to get students acquiring language in the most effective, the quickest way is through this consistent immersion. They are providing lots of modeling. They're showing students what kinds of tasks they want to be done. They're showing them how to use the language. They're giving lots of opportunities for repetition, using things like visuals, total physical response, which is the strategy lots of teachers use that is multisensory, getting students hearing the language, seeing the language by the teacher using gestures or showing them a physical way to kind of act out what they are saying and hearing. We're also doing things like singing lots of songs or chants, riddles, tongue twisters, even using language in fun ways, because we know that the brain processes chants and songs differently than just spoken language. There's always a focus on developing language. Teachers are teaching reading and math and science and social studies, but they always have kind of a double mission, in that they're teaching these subjects, but they're also developing language at the same time. Teachers also get students to compare and contrast the languages. We know that the brain doesn't think of in one language at once. If you're bilingual, once you're bilingual, your brain is using all of your linguistic resources at once. And so we draw out those connections and we show students how the languages are similar and different. In the classroom and through Google Meets now, teachers are providing supports to students to overcome frustration. Frustration actually is a good thing in learning. We want students to kind of reach that point where they don't feel like the expert, they don't know something, but then we want to provide the support to get through that kind of productive struggle, some people refer to it as, so that they can kind of have that breakthrough in learning. And they do this by, as I was saying in the previous slide, providing opportunities to practice in a safe environment. So students start taking risks to use the language, knowing that nothing's going to happen if they make a mistake. They're just going to learn from it. We want students to know that the errors and the mistakes are part of learning, and we celebrate those with them. Teachers are in the classroom. They would be providing small group instruction based on needs. Through Google Meets, teachers actually have more time to be meeting with students in small groups and really tailoring those groups to the needs of the students as they get to know their students more and more. One way that teachers provide support to students in the classroom is through peer support. Through our remote learning, students are getting that peer support more in their small group than in their whole group. In their whole group, they are relying on the teacher for the cues and the language that they should be using in that. So I've hinted at some of the ways that remote learning is different, how this is a really unique start to our school year that none of us have ever experienced before. And I was talking about immersion. Since immersion occurs through video conferencing, we know that students need to be attentive to the screen. I was talking about how teachers are modeling, showing students what they're doing. They're using lots of gestures, lots of visuals, and all of that happening on the screen. It's really important that the students are paying attention to that. There's a way that students can pin on the screen the teacher's video box so that they can see the teacher up close to be paying attention to what they're doing. And I mentioned that peer support is a little bit different, that in the school setting, students are able to rely on their peers. They can mimic the language. They can kind of see what other students are starting to do if they've understood the teacher's command to take out their pencil in their workbook and turn to a certain page or whatnot. There are still opportunities for this peer instruction in remote learning. But as I was mentioning, in remote learning, this is happening more in the small group setting. Those small group meetings are where a lot of, where teachers are expecting students to have their microphone on, be focusing on what their peers are doing, and really collaborating more. Something that's unique is that during this remote learning setting, teachers are using some English to explain or help students navigate through the technology. But teachers are using Spanish for their instruction during their Spanish time in the classroom. Typically, we would be able to model for students the things that we would like them to do with their Chromebook or with the materials in the classroom. And we're a bit limited in how we can do that through remote instruction. So sometimes for the sake of not losing instructional minutes, the teacher might go into English quickly to help students, but then they're going back into Spanish. And the amount of English being used in the Spanish classroom will lessen as time goes on and students are more familiar with what's expected of them. Something that is a constant, no matter what school year we're in, is that all students go through an adjustment period when they start school. Every school year, the kindergarten, first grade, every grade, teachers see the students coming back. If they haven't been using Spanish over the summer, their Spanish is a little rusty. It needs some maintenance done to it, thinking of that housing or that construction analogy. There's some maintenance that needs to be done. They're also getting used to their new teacher, the teacher's expectations, their routines, and maybe even things like the teacher's accent or their rate of speaking might be different from last year's teacher to this year's teacher. So there's always this adjustment period where we expect in about the first month of school that students are adapting and kind of getting ready for the school year. In this remote environment, that period is a little bit longer. We're now into the middle of September. Kids have been in school almost a month now, and we're seeing some kids kind of ready to really jump into instruction. And some are needing a bit more support, and that is okay. We know that students need this extra support in this environment, and teachers are willing to go at a slower pace and kind of hold students' hands a little bit more than they would in the classroom, because they're there and they're with them modeling things and ready to go. So we ask that you just be patient, know that your child will get there, and we're all here to support them through that. Some tips that we typically share with parents around this time of year is to continue using language at home. Talk, sing, read with your student in whatever language you feel comfortable doing that in. If you are not comfortable supporting or doing that in Spanish at home, then the best thing you can do for your student is to support them as much as possible in English, by just having language around them constantly so that their brain is kind of putting together language and um, hearing language, no matter if it's English or Spanish. If you are wanting ideas of how to expose your child to the other language, to Spanish, teachers, usually around conference time, they're sharing resources with parents on music that you can listen to, or resources for audiobooks, cartoons, things like YouTube channels and whatnot, maybe some apps or some websites to look into, so that your child can be immersed a little bit more in Spanish at home, beyond what is being provided through the school, through the classroom. So talk to your teacher, your child's teacher, about that if you're interested in some of those Spanish resources. And you might be getting that around conference time. A tip that we usually tell dual language parents is to avoid translating everything for the students. In a typical year, we're thinking more of the homework or the schoolwork, the books that are coming home and whatnot. Now, in the remote learning environment where everyone is doing school at home or outside of the school setting, just know that we don't need your children to understand every word of what's being given to them. That a lot of times we're working through a theme, a thematic unit, and we want students to start making connections with the vocabulary. They're understanding the most important words of what's being given to them, but we don't need them to have everything translated for them. That actually sets language learning back, because instead of focusing on trying to understand the Spanish, they're just kind of waiting for it to be given to them in English, and then they aren't focusing on the Spanish. If you are learning right alongside your child and you're taking advantage of this opportunity to brush up on your own Spanish skills, and you want to do that for your own brain's processing, then go for it. Just know that the students don't need it. And if you are learning right alongside your students, then show them that you're excited to be learning Spanish and that you value bilingualism, and you're excited for them for this opportunity to be developing their Spanish as well. Along those same lines is we encourage families to celebrate accomplishments. We're doing this in the classroom. We're celebrating, I hadn't heard you answer me in Spanish, and you answered me in Spanish for the first time today. Or you read that whole book, and that's the first time you've done that, or you improved from the first time you read that, and now you're sounding so much more natural. We're celebrating those small accomplishments, but something else that we're doing is celebrating the errors, and we encourage families to celebrate those errors too. If it looks like a child is getting frustrated over errors, we try and help them form that mindset of errors or mistakes are a good thing because we learn from them. We embedded in here a link to a video that's about how to make your child hate learning a foreign language. It just kind of takes all of these tips and puts them in a funny perspective of, kind of turning it around and do these things, and your child will surely hate learning a foreign language. So we'll share that link out separately. And just a few final thoughts before we finish here. If you are concerned about something that's going on with your child's learning at home, we encourage you to talk to your child's teacher. Know that teachers want to hear from their families, from the families of their students, whether it's successes, things that are going well at home, or things that you are observing at home that you think the teacher would like to know about, or just kind of some of the struggles or ways that your child learns best. Those kinds of things are all things that teachers want to know about, because those are the kinds of things that the information they'd be gathering on students at the beginning of the school year through their own observations. We also wanted to let everyone know that this is the 17th year of our dual language program. And year after year, we have seen students really rise to the challenge of learning Spanish. And we've seen that their brains are really capable of so much. It's common to be worried about or considering, did I make the right decision? Is this going to make school too difficult for my student? Just know that our brains are capable of so much. Our brains adapt and are very flexible, and they're kind of wired to learn languages. So keep that in mind as you're supporting your student, and know that lots of children have been through this program very successfully. We're going through this bump in the road of remote learning, but we are confident that your children are going to rise to the occasion and do very well with this. And lastly, we, as the Department of Language and Culture and all of the dual language teachers, we would just like to thank you for your trust and your support, and we encourage you to reach out to us with any questions or concerns. And with that, we'll end. Thank you for taking the time out to listen to this presentation.